Okay, good evening, everyone. Also, good morning to the audience in DC and welcome to DİPAM virtual panel discussion. I want to remind you that this panel is being recorded and can be watched at the DİPAM YouTube channel. First, I would like to give a bit of a background of the topic that we'll discuss, then introduce our two distinguished experts before we dive into the questions. So the topic of our panel discussion is the AUKUS Pact and its implication on the NATO alliance, which will approximately take 60 minutes of our time. We'll try our best to do it in a timely manner. And as it's widely understood, the AUKUS Pact is a result of China's growing assertiveness in the region. Beijing asserts its power in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly its naval and economic power. The AUKUS Pact that was announced in September of this year will allow Canberra to build nuclear-powered submarines and underwater drones for the first time, using technology provided by the US and the UK. France, on the other hand, feels betrayed by the Pact and took unprecedented step by withdrawing its ambassadors to the US and Australia. Although US and France seem willing to move forward, there are questions surrounding the broader implications of this tripartite agreement on the NATO alliance. The panel discussion is aimed at obtaining insights from two leading experts, which I'm delighted to have this evening. We have Ambassador Zekeriya AKÇAM, who was a former Turkish ambassador to Indonesia, the ASEAN, and Timor-Leste from 2012 to 2016. He was a member of parliament representing Izmir from 2002 to 2007. He was a member of European Convention representing the Turkish Grand National Assembly, member of Turkish delegation in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Western European Union, also vice chair of the Liberal Democrat and Reformist Group in the Council of Europe. Ambassador AKÇAM was also a senior advisor to the Prime Minister from 2007 to 2012. He holds a BA from Ankara University, School of Political Science, Department of Politics and Public Administration, and Master of Arts majoring in International Relations and International Political Economy from American University. In 1997 to 2002, Ambassador AKÇAM served in the Prime Ministry under Secretariat for Foreign Trade DG for European Union Affairs. He has given lectures on NATO, European security and defense policy, military alliances, economic diplomacy, international political economy subject in various universities. He had received a fellowship from Cicero Foundation on transatlantic security relations and was invited to Wilton Park conferences several times for the subject. Ambassador AKÇAM is currently member of Board of Trustees of the Maori Foundation, representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador AKÇAM, welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much for being with you. Thanks.
I'm also delighted to have Dr. Kenneth Weinstein with us. Dr. Kenneth Weinstein is the Walter P. Stern Distinguished Fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he previously served as president and the CEO from 2011-2021. He is an expert on U.S. foreign policy. His articles have appeared in such publications as Le Monde, The Wall Street Journal, and the Yomiuri Shimbun. In 2020, he was nominated by President Trump to serve as U.S. Ambassador to Japan and received anonymous bipartisan support from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for his nomination. He previously was a chair of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, including the Voice of America. Dr. Weinstein speaks fluent French and German and was decorated by France as a Chevalier in the Order of Arts and Letters in 2006. He holds a PhD from Harvard University in Political Science. Dr. Weinstein, welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Right, we shall begin our discussion, and I'll begin with the first questions. And first, I will go to Ambassador AKÇAM. As we know that the AUKUS Pact had led to a diplomatic crisis between the two NATO allies, and I think this doesn't appear to be just a dispute between a submarine contract and raise a larger questions about how the US value its European ally by excluding it from important partnership with Australia. So do you see this as the US under Biden administration is undermining its European ally? And also, do you think this means that US having difficulties in revitalizing its alliances to meet the current defining challenges? Ambassador AKÇAM, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, maybe we should be starting talking about the military alliances and NATO. there are always differences between the alignment and the alliances. And the NATO is a military alliance, so established as a formal military alliance with a formal agreement. And there are requirements and the commitments for each member, for each alliance to the Atlantic Union. So military alliances also are instruments of defense and the security policy for respective states. So they must be dynamic, and they must have also dynamic elements so that they can evaluate and change for the roles of international security. When we look at the AUKUS, what we are talking about right now, it is a pact, it is not an alliance. So therefore, the NATO is a European alliance for protecting the North. By the name, it is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which means it is for North Atlantic. So therefore, what we are talking about, it is outside the North Atlantic area. So we are like Suez, like Afghanistan, like Iraq. So it is out of area. Therefore, we cannot be dealing with very much deeply with the French position, whether it is a good ally or bad ally, or whether it is reliable or not. So therefore, we cannot measure with this behavior or with this event whether United States is going to be include French or others. On the other hand, when we look at the other EU members of the NATO, like Germany, like Italy, and the NATO members of the EU, and they are also not included into the AUKUS Pact, but they never complain about it. So it is specifically for France, I think. So I don't, it is a good criteria to measure whether France is a good ally or not. And the United States is just started to containment policy of China. So therefore, it is part of the containment policy. It is more alignment rather than an alliance. So that is shortly what I would like to say. On the other hand, United States started already before, like Marshall Plan, like Marshall Aid, like recovery program for Europe, by starting TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreements for economic perspectives. But it didn't go very well. So when China is rising, so they have to make a kind of containment, a kind of restriction of Chinese power in Southeast Asia, not only in Southeast Asia, also globally. So therefore, there has been coming from the bilateral world and also the unipolar world, and right now we are going to be multilateral world. So therefore, the alliances are not the same alliances as before. So we have to look at the alliances again. And maybe French position, I mean, right now, the French diplomacy, French foreign policy about its reaction, very harsh reaction against NATO or kind of crisis in NATO. I don't think it is a serious crisis. I don't think it is a crisis, by the way, because French, maybe the NATO was established on two pillars. One is providing balance of power in Europe and the protecting the Europe from any imminent invasion from the Soviet Union. So therefore, there is a short word for this original bargaining in North Atlantic Treaty, and the Russians out, Americans in, Germans down. So which means maybe there will be a consideration about the balance of power in Europe, rather than why the French was excluded from this AUKUS. Maybe French is thinking more when the Anglo-Pact moved to Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States. When they moved to Asia Pacific, maybe French can feel insecure in Europe, so that there is a kind of shift or imbalance in Europe as protecting the French. Because as we know in history, both in the First World War and the Second World War, French was invaded twice by Germany. So therefore, he needs always a balance of power in Europe rather than going to like Asia Pacific, because it is his priority. I mean, the French foreign policies, French government's priority is to keep the balance in Europe and around Europe. So therefore, as a NATO ally, of course, he can make such reactions, but it doesn't mean that United States or losing it as ally or it's a crisis or something like that. I don't think, but things will go smoothly. And I can understand French reaction to this AUKUS Pact. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador AKÇAM. So we pick up quite a few things from the insights from Ambassador AKÇAM. One of them is that this pact is more of alignments rather than the alliance, and that this is not something that we can call crisis. I'd like to go to Dr. Weinstein. Do you have anything to add or a different insights perhaps on this issue?
Well, no, thank you very much. Again, I'm delighted to be here. I agree with Ambassador AKÇAM that this is not, I don't view this as a crisis in NATO, but I do think that the AUKUS announcement was handled with a level of just, if not malpractice, incompetence by the Biden administration. This was a team that came to Washington that pledged that it was going to, that allies were back, that America was going to start listening to its allies, that it was going to put NATO first on the agenda. Instead, we saw and we have to put the AUKUS announcement within a broader context of two different things that occurred prior to it. The first and the more important one was the bungling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the poor notification given, and absolute lack of consultation with our key NATO allies before this decision was made. Where the decision was made here in Washington. We did not speak, as far as I know, did not request information input from our allies during the Biden administration, and it resembles the approach that was taken during the Obama administration when there was a period of 91 days early in the Obama administration in which President Obama decided on a surge in Afghanistan and also did not consult with our allies and just essentially told them they had to increase their troops. And there's been a tendency under both political parties, but I think to sort of act unilaterally without consulting our allies. It's a big problem. It's a source of deep frustration. It's a source of deep frustration to the French as well, not simply because of the huge contributions the French have made in places like Afghanistan, but also because the French were upset with the decision that the U.S. made to cut back our assistance to their anti-terror activities in Mali, in the Sahel, which were very critical, and to ask for payments for some of the efforts that we were doing to assist them in the fight against terrorism in Africa. So that was going on. At the same time, the Biden administration had also essentially given in to the German government on the question of Nord Stream 2, removing the sanctions on companies that were building the German companies that were building the pipeline at the request of Chancellor Merkel. And so the French had the sense that they were not being listened to, despite the fact they make a very heavy military contribution to NATO. They're a global political player. And their frustrations were already beginning to boil up. And so when the AUKUS announcement was made, it was taken as an absolute insult to the French, who have important strategic assets in the Indo-Pacific. They have 1.6 million citizens who live in that region of the world. They have significant military assets as well there. And so the sense was that this was an absolute slap in the face, particularly coming from, we have a Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who is an old friend of mine, who was educated in Paris and went to high school there and was being feted by the French as a reliable and French ally. And the French were hoping that, in a sense, in this little competition they have with both the Germans and the Brits inside of NATO, that they would sort of be recognized for their important security contributions, which are quite significant. And so when the announcement was made, the French felt as if they were absolutely slapped in the face, betrayed, stabbed in the back, as they put it. They bring real strategic assets to the table in the South Pacific. That being said, there were definitely frustrations with the French, with how the French had been handling the contract from the Australians. These frustrations were known in the United States, certainly. They were known in Europe, they were known in Australia. This was an Australia decision aligned with the Brits. And it's an important pact, and it really adds a new strategic dimension to what Australia can contribute to Asian security. Going from diesel-powered submarines to nuclear submarines means you have an ability to power project. You don't have to worry about refueling. You can go a lot longer. You can go further into North Asia, which is where the security concerns really are, Northeast Asia. And so it could even be helpful theoretically in the event of an attack on Taiwan. But the issue with this contract, with the AUKUS agreement, which is a broad agreement, it's not simply a submarine deal. It involves quantum technologies, cyber technologies, artificial intelligence, and it fits into a broader framework that the U.S. has with Australia and the United Kingdom, as well as Canada, that these countries fit into our own defense industrial base, and they have the ability to have access to advanced technologies. The issue is that the nuclear submarines, as of now, will not be ready until at least 2040. The French submarines, the diesel-powered ones, were going to be ready by 2030 for the Barracuda short fin submarine. So there are lots of questions that are on the table. I don't think this is a crisis in NATO. I do think, though, the administration will now be much more attentive to French requests. And the administration also has noted that it's expressed a willingness to support an EU defense capacity, an independent EU defense capacity, which I think is the right step to take. We need as much of a contribution towards security issues from the EU as we can get, as long as it fits sort of within a broader NATO framework. So I don't see a crisis. I see some positive things resulting. I do think it was handled with it was just handled with a level of, it was just amateur hour in terms of the way that the announcement was handled on our side, though, and it was a shameful moment and a betrayal of our French allies.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstein. And you mentioned about the exit from Afghanistan, and I think this is related to my questions that, as you know, that the Pact was announced just a month after the U.S. withdrawal from Kabul, and I think it speaks volume about what potentially is the U.S. priority, and with the U.S. being focused on the long-haul competition with China. Do you think this will have any implication on NATO as alliance?
I think I think it does have an implication. It has implications. It tells the Europeans, it reminds the Europeans, in a sense, and when I say the Europeans, I'm not including the Brits in that group, but it reminds the Europeans of the need that they need to step up on their own. They need to take care of things in their own house, that our focus increasingly will be on Asia. And the fact that the announcement was made in such a rush manner, it didn't have to be announced the day that it was announced. Okay, there was, Boris Johnson was in New York for the UN General Assembly, wanted a meeting at the White House. Morrison, also wanted to be able to see the president. My sense was it was announced when it was announced to show that the United States was still, that our deterrent was not damaged by the disaster in Afghanistan and the disastrous decision to withdraw and the disastrous way the withdrawal happened. And I think it was done to show that people still look to us as the main power player, and was a sign sent to the Chinese. Don't think that the United States is entering into a Vietnam-like era where we're going to engage in a period of extraordinary self-doubt, where we're going to sit around and question everything we do. So I think in that sense, it sends a strong signal to the Chinese. I do think the signal it sends to our European allies is one that our focus really is on Asia. It's not exclusively on Asia, but we need to make sure that our European allies do their utmost for their own defense, because we are absolutely moving assets to the Asia theater, which, even you go back to the 2018 Indo-Pacific strategy from the Department of Defense, we announced that Asia was, or the Indo-Pacific is our primary theater, and we're moving assets there. So, and it also sends a signal to our allies in the Middle East who need to step up more, and they have been stepping up themselves, whether it be the Saudis, the Israelis, the UAE, and others.
Right, Dr. Weinstein, thank you for your insight. Now I'd like to go to Ambassador AKÇAM. We did speak about countering China earlier in the discussion. So what do you think the factors that have undermined France's credibility and reliability in United States' eyes when it comes to deterring China? Ambassador AKÇAM.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Weinstein, because he has given us a very insightful information, especially regarding Africa, Sahel, and some other detailed information. I'm very much glad to hear that. So thank you so much, especially for our audience. So regarding your question, and I think we cannot, as I told before, we cannot measure whether France is a reliable or not. France is a really reliable alliance when you compare it to others. I mean, not comparing, but exactly in NATO. But this is, as I told before, this is out of area operations. This is Asia. This is totally out of Europe. But the original bargain in the North Atlantic Treaty was the balance of providing balance of power in Europe, and also to have a kind of robust, a kind of support to Europe, so that through this recovery and the Marshall Aid programs, so that Europe can be one and can defend itself against Soviet invasion or Soviet threat. So therefore, they care always, the priority always was given to balance of power in Europe, as I mentioned before, like Germany and England. So the French has a very strong experience in Europe, especially when they lost the balance of power. There will be always a war in Europe. So they care a lot, the balance of power in intra-alliance relationship rather than going abroad. So this is the first point I would like to say, because we cannot, as I told, we cannot measure or see that whether France is a reliable alliance, because they were out from the military flank of NATO. Later on, they joined, so they are very strong. They are moving, especially European defense and the security policy a lot, but still there is no common European defense and the security policy. And rather than this, there is no organization for protecting Europe or for one common security and foreign policy that any organization can manage or can run. So regarding the Asia issue, regarding AUKUS issue, so there is we can say Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States, a kind of Anglo alliance, rather than taking French outside, taking the other European alliance outside this pact, which means it is an Anglo alliance rather than the NATO alliance, because it's not a NATO, it is not NATO, it is totally different. So therefore, United States as a hegemonic power cannot take all NATO alliances to some other places. Even Turkey is a NATO alliance, a member of NATO, but we never complain about it, why we are not in AUKUS. So this is the first one. Second one, when I lived in 5 years, almost 5 years in Indonesia, I noticed that, especially when we look at after the Second World War and Vietnam War, there is a strong impression always among the people, among the East Asian nations, Southeast Asian nations, about colonialism. So therefore, we have to consider always this part of the story also, because we cannot say all ASEAN members, for example. There is a regional security community, which is ASEAN. Not all of them are supporting the United States, because when we remember always the Vietnam War. So they appreciate, they have a kind of, the United States has a kind of credit and a good reputation. Why? Because the United States saved during the Second World War most of the Asian states from Japanese invasion. So therefore they know this story, but they don't want to remind another colonial history. So therefore I think there is also a kind of maybe why French very beginning was not included into this AUKUS Pact. It would be an idea that when French came, and it could be remind kind of colonial history in those nations, and it can undermine the trust of the United States. And also for this moment, they don't need actually, because there will be a kind of alignment rather than alliance, and the NATO is something else. This AUKUS alliance is something else. So we should be considering about this. So therefore, it is not relevant to me when we look at the French, whether to see French or to measure French action or French foreign policy about complaining about AUKUS. AUKUS is totally different because it's a new world. It is a new international security system. It is not the same as before, like after the Second World War, but it is totally new concept. It is totally new era. So therefore, there should be a new instruments also. This instrument is one of them to contain China when United States wants to contain China in the Asia Pacific. So this is my point that I would like to point out, especially because they are two different things. So therefore, we never compare. If something happens in Europe, yes, we can measure whether French is a reliable ally or not. There is something against Soviet Union or Russia right now. Yes, we can talk about it. Or when we have a kind of NATO area operations inside NATO, inside the Atlantic axis, yes, we can measure. But here, there is no need to measure whether French is there or not, because there are other members of NATO. Maybe the French wants to say something about his past in Southeast Asia. He wants to protect its own interests in Southeast Asia by, integrating itself into the AUKUS. But as I mentioned before, it is totally different, two concepts. This is different concept, the NATO is a different concept.
Right, thank you, Ambassador AKÇAM. So Ambassador AKÇAM has emphasized that France is indeed a reliable ally, and this is more like an Anglo alliance rather than a NATO alliance. Now, moving on to the Indo-Pacific region, and I'm going to go to Dr. Weinstein this time. How do you think China has responded to the announcement of the AUKUS Pact, Dr. Weinstein?
Oh, China is beside itself. China is extremely angry. China is, look, the China-Australia relations have been very fraught. China has been Australia's #1 trading partner. China is dependent on Australia for numerous mine goods, and Australia has treated, has a big agricultural market in China. So but there's been significant tension between Australia and China over the last couple of years. No secret that's been exposed, the massive infiltration of Chinese Communist Party fifth column elements seeking to influence Australian politics. No secret about the frustration that the Chinese have voiced when Australia called for an independent examination at the WHO of the origins of COVID, which the Australians, like a significant part of U.S. intelligence, the U.S. intelligence community believes, do not believe in the zoonotic origins of COVID-19, but they believe that it is most likely it could possibly have arisen at the Wuhan Institute of Virology through gain of function activities. There's also been, for the first time, increasingly close, although unofficial, Australian-Taiwanese relations. And we had the important visit of former Prime Minister Tony Abbott to Taipei a month or so ago with some very outspoken remarks by the former Prime Minister, who was a close ally of Prime Minister Morrison. So we've seen, and then we've seen these massive tariffs that the Chinese have placed on Australian agricultural goods, on Australian trade. And so there have been tensions between China and Australia. Australia arguably is the closest U.S. ally certainly is the closest ally in the South Pacific, and arguably among the Quad members, Australia, Japan, India, and the United States, there's kind of a keen partnership with the Australians, who have moved and changed their own defense concept. The Australians, until recently, viewed themselves as a balancer between the United States and China. And I think this was one of the reasons why the Australians went with the French submarine tender rather than going with an offer that the Mitsubishi Heavy had made, because the Japanese were considered tougher on China back at the time when Prime Minister Turnbull was making the decision on which route to go with regard to the purchase of submarines. And so, but things have utterly changed in now down in Canberra with Australia now understanding that it needs really to power project and get ready for a potential contingency in Northeast Asia and elsewhere. So it is adapted a view of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy that is hand in hand with the American strategy, and that is, in a sense, more security focused than certainly the Indian vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and arguably the Japanese version of the Indo-Pacific, of their Indo-Pacific vision. And so China is not happy at all with Australia. And this is a bipartisan thing in Australia. It's not just in the ruling party, that it's on the left as well. The frustration with China has grown, is deep, bipartisan, as it is in the United States. And so this is a moment where China is now waking up to new realities in the South Pacific and new realities with regard to Australia.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstein, and I agree with you. And I'm sure our audience, some of them probably agree that certainly there's frustrations that's grown against China's behavior in the region. So you did mention earlier that when you mentioned Europeans, that UK isn't included to it. So what do you think has motivated the UK to join the Pact? I mean, does taking part indicate a determination on the part of the current government to further showcase its independence from continental Europe? Dr. Weinstein?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely part of it. Look, this is payback to the French. There was a sense that the French were leading the line on the tough Brexit negotiations, and that Michel Barnier, the former French foreign minister, former French agricultural minister, now candidate for the French presidency, was the hardest liner in the fight against the Brits and in demanding a tough line on the Brexit negotiations for the EU. That's certainly part of it. But there's a broader issue going on with the UK, which is that the UK under Boris Johnson has a desire to show that it is global Britain now, that it is again sort of returning to sort of a shadow of its former glory from the 19th century, that it's decidedly going to be a global power, that it is going to re-engage in a sense with its former colonies, with the Commonwealth. That's absolutely part of it. And within that context, there's the profound frustration with the People's Republic of China. When global Britain was first conceived in the debate over Brexit, I think there was a strong view that China, the People's Republic of China, would be a key commercial partner for the United Kingdom, and that it would also be a key investment partner for the United Kingdom. But in the aftermath of COVID and the deceit from the People's Republic of China, the pressure put on the World Health Organization and the like, as well as the horrific crackdown on democracy in Hong Kong, and the essentially ignoring, overturning the one nation, two systems agreement on the reversion of the 1997 reversion of Hong Kong, public opinion in the UK has utterly changed on China. And so there's now a clear sense that China is a dangerous strategic competitor. And so global Britain is trying to reassert itself through its ties to Australia, through its ties to the United States. And it was important for Boris Johnson, who is viewed as close to Donald Trump, to be able to kind of get into the ante room with Joe Biden and deliver something very useful for the Biden administration. Clearly, this is what's happened with AUKUS, and so it's brought it's strengthened U.S.-UK relations, obviously strengthened Australia-UK relations, and has reminded the Europeans that the Brits are a global power as well. And there was also, the last thing, let me say, there was a real focus in the UK from the Cameron years on internally, that there was a sense that the UK, that Tony Blair in particular had gone a bit overboard with the alliance with the United States, both in Afghanistan and especially in Iraq, and that the UK was really focused inward and distancing itself from the United States on the global scene. And this reverses that pattern. And so it allows, and the UK had played this special role within the EU of being, along with the Eastern European countries, our sort of, wouldn't say eyes and ears, but our closest partner within the EU. And so now that strong partnership is restored, rebuilt, and is focused on the security challenge of the 21st century. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstein. I'd like to go to Ambassador AKÇAM. Do you think that this pact will have any de-escalation effect in Indo-Pacific region? I mean, in terms of the tension between the US with its allies and China. Ambassador AKÇAM.
I think this AUKUS pact is a first kick, and we will see what would be the impacts from other nations, because Asia is not Europe, so there is no common culture that we call sometimes security communities that we could create. So even ASEAN is not a military alliance, as I mentioned before. So there is the San Francisco system is going on. So still, as the security system is the San Francisco system established after the Second World War. So therefore, United States, I think, will be very much neatly, smoothly, and organizing its alliances in Asia Pacific. So from the beginning of the Cold War, like the same story against the Soviet Union, I think United States will right now will avoid any provocations against China, because they will be a kind of very slow move and always open the cooperation. And including these Southeast Asian nations especially, they are very much sensitive because they are coming from the colonial history, and they know this history is not far away in history, just 50 years or something. So therefore, the job is, the challenge is really big. And the China is economically is very strong. And the Chinese, especially Belt and Road policy and some other seaports that until Africa, it is very much should be considered very importantly. And since TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, was not successful, so therefore, if you do not have economic base, like in Europe, because there is a European recovery program, so that, and the United States and Europe established NATO as a military alliance to secure Europe for another 50 years. Under this umbrella, Europe was able to be a major player in economic terms in the world. But right now in Asia is huge regarding the population, regarding the lands, regarding the sea and sea power and everything. So therefore, without going any conflict, without going any war, and there will be a very challenge, especially for the ground, when you move to these peaceful forces, especially some dynamics in Asia. To me, and whether it is the escalation of China or escalation of tensions, and it depends on the US foreign policy, it depends on the US alliance policy or alignment policy in Asia Pacific. So if they can calculate the risks and the opportunities in East Asia, I think United States will be successful without going to war with China, because we always talking about this toxicity trap, whether United States and China will go to war or not. This is the main concern right now. So therefore, I'm hopeful. I think we can manage it, not like the Cold War, that I don't expect that there will be a bilateral bipolar world, but under this multipolar world, we can still be successful to have a peace, to establish a peace in South Asia Pacific. I think it depends on the security terms. And when we look at the AUKUS Pact right now, and they are talking about the submarines and also the nuclear weapons, missiles, and some others. Of course, China will not stay silent. I think China is going to make the counterbalance, and will have the same weapons like security dilemma in IR theory that we are always talking. So they will start, of course, they will respond to same level of the escalation as the United States is doing. So therefore, I think they are going to measure up each other and they watch each other very, very closely and without going any major conflict. But Asia is very difficult, not in Europe, because culturally it is different and ethnically it is different. Everybody has, every nation has a different kind of history. I mean, the diplomatic history and the national history. So United States, the UK, even France is outsiders. So they have a colonial past always in their mind. So the job is not easy as in Europe, in short.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador AKÇAM. You mentioned interesting points here that Asia isn't Europe. It's complex, and they don't have security culture. Dr. Weinstein, perhaps you would like to add to it, or do you have different insights, perhaps?
No, I agree fully with Ambassador AKÇAM's point. It's Asia, as you know, is just a very different region that you look at the region, whether it be the Quad nations or in the Indo-Pacific is how we talk about it increasingly in rather than Asia. And so we look at the Indo-Pacific from India, from Sri Lanka, all the way to the west coast of the United States and even the west coast of South America. And in that region, we see the Quad countries who are increasingly, it's not an alliance either. It is a cooperative arrangement between the United States, India, Japan, and Australia that is focused on, we do military exercises, but we are increasingly focused on other activities, particularly under the Biden administration, which held the first head of state Quad meeting. We're focused on the attempt to provide manufacture and distribute vaccines, 1 billion COVID vaccines to Southeast Asia. We're focused on supply chain management, getting secure supply chains. We're focused on fighting climate change. We're also focused on the question of chip manufacturing as well, and how to sort of get some chip manufacturing done, given the threat from China that China poses to the significant chip design and manufacturing capabilities in Taiwan. But you have the Quad countries, and then of course as you well know, you have the ASEAN nations, and the Quad countries are more forward-leaning, though they are each differently forward-leaning in their attitudes to China on the security level, and each have different levels of economic engagement with China. But then you look at the ASEAN nations, which have tried to, by and large, play with a couple of exceptions, have tried to play a balancing role between the United States and China, and which, by and large, the ASEAN nations don't want to be implicated, with the exception of Vietnam, which is very upfront, and the Philippines, which is a critical U.S. ally. The rest have been less willing to be publicly critical of the Chinese, and though they are all under challenge from the Chinese, whether it be in the information space, whether it be in the economic space, whether it be in the cyberspace and the like. And so you have different reactions, whether it's in Thailand, whether it be in Singapore, whether it be in Indonesia, or certainly Cambodia or Burma, to China's geostrategic intentions. And so it's a region with great cultural variance as well, that adds to the complexity of, and with, as was mentioned earlier by Ambassador AKÇAM, different colonial histories as well, that make things all the more complicated for the region. And one of the most interesting facets of our security cooperation is the growing security cooperation with Vietnam, and the growing trade cooperation with Vietnam, which has really become a focal point for our Indo-Pacific strategy in a way that one would never have guessed 25 or 30 years ago, as the Vietnamese have their long history of contention with China. So it is a complicated region. It is a region under great pressure from China, certainly, and as a region, I think that American policymakers are really starting finally to grasp the nuances of at high levels. That's not to say the regional specialists have always grasped these, but it is a region that with great religious diversity, cultural diversity, geopolitical diversity, and one that both depends on the American security umbrella, but is also uncomfortable with being placed in a position where they're asked to sign on to the American security agenda. And so we're certainly in a complicated moment, and also with the rejection of the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, as Ambassador AKÇAM mentioned it, and now with China seeking to enter the TPP and with Taiwan seeking as well to enter, there are increasing pressures here in Washington to take a second look at the TPP to try to figure out if we can solve some of the issues that prevented us from being able to present that bill to Congress, whether it be under the Obama administration or under the Trump administration. And so, and some of those issues range from an insistence that, well, Vietnam in particular has got, doesn't want to sign on to high-end labor and environmental regulations. And then there's this question of domestic content provisions, which the Trump administration brought up. There was concern that China could enter into the TPP unofficially through factories that it could own, and Chinese products coming in through Southeast Asian companies, particularly in the automobile sector, where you could have cars manufactured with almost 50% of Chinese electronics, even though China is not a part of the TPP. And the purpose of the TPP at the end of the day was to have the kind of high-end regulation that would exclude Chinese products, which are oftentimes manufactured based on intellectual property theft and the like. So, and subsidies to state-owned enterprises. So it's a complex region, and we in the United States need to do a much better job of engaging the region than we have in the past.
Right, thank you for your insight, Dr. Weinstein. That's very detailed. And you did mention about the Quad countries on one side and also ASEAN nations on the other, playing balancing role. So I'd like to go to Ambassador AKÇAM, because you were at one point an ambassador to ASEAN for quite some time. And as you know that Australia has reaffirmed that it has no intention of obtaining nuclear weapons. And I think that's the concern from some of the ASEAN nations. Do you think down the road, will there be any consensus of this, that maybe ASEAN as an association would agree to how United States approach to the region in countering China?
I think the ASEAN is not a military alliance, even not an alignment. It is they want to create a kind of security community, which means a common understanding, a kind of much peaceful words, much peaceful concepts, common understanding of the problems in the how do you say, in the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. So therefore, I am sure Dr. Weinstein knows that there is a kind of conduct of AUKUS. So there are some principles, but there is no enforcing or commitment or anything that you can enforce the alliances or member countries to do something. So therefore, there is always a kind of conflict of interest among the countries, like Vietnam, Philippines. So therefore, what China is doing, like as opposed to what United States is doing, always they would like to make a kind of incursions into the ASEAN. So they would like to make a kind of, divided ASEAN members. So therefore, there is no unanimity. Neither it is a military alliance, nor it is an alignment. It is a kind of common understanding, trying to create a kind of based on Asian culture, trying to understand and establish a kind of common understanding of security matters. So, but when you talk about the security, which is hard power, so therefore you must have some defense and also offense matters, offense instruments, so that you can improve, you can protect yourself, even at least at the minimum level, to defend yourself. So therefore, it is very difficult. On the other hand, when you compare with Europe, like with NATO, and the Asian nations are new ones after the Second World War, especially, so after the colonialism. So therefore, from my experience, I know that they are very much sensitive about national sovereignty. So they don't want to render. Therefore, rather than a kind of establishing a strong alliance or any military alliance, they're very much against. I know and I experienced that, how strong, how sensitive they are over their sovereignty. So therefore, there are some conflicts when I was there as an ambassador between Australia and some other countries, including Indonesia, for example. I saw how sensitive they are, especially regarding the national pride and the kind of national sense of being a nation, because they are new, kind of young nations, when we call them. Even there are so many, there are so many ethnic minorities or ethnic groups, even 100, 200, it doesn't matter. There is a nation state concept as a concept, where nationalism is still very much, very much strong among the nations. So that is another difficulty to manage, because China is one. There is a one Chinese nation. But when you go through like Europe, you cannot, therefore the starting point of ASEAN as a regional organization, security organization, is the right point. Why? Without creating a common security culture, you cannot put the nations on the same table and talk the same or similar problems, or to make a front against your adversaries or against the threat that coming from China or some other countries. So therefore, it is very beginning. Europe, when you compare Europe and with Asia, Asian nations are very new and Europe is very old. So therefore, many principles and rules are already taken place. And there are in 50 years, there are two big wars in Europe. One is First World War and the Second World War. So therefore, they learned a lot, they lost a lot. On the other hand, when we compare the Soviet Union, how they access in Europe and how China is accessing in Asia, China is very much groundly accessed into Asia, economically and culturally, because every nation, there is a Chinese minority even. There is coming from the Chinese, so therefore, when you compare, then it's very difficult to contain China with the same policies as United States did in Europe, because this kind of the deep influence of China into all Asian nations you can see everywhere, including Philippines, including Indonesia and some other countries. So therefore, indeed, in short, what I would like to say, and it is, we have to consider always these differences and make comparisons always, whether the same policies or same instruments, same approach, as we did just before the Cold War, I mean, after the Second World War, whether it works in Asia or not. So therefore, we must be extra careful about this as someone who is caring about the peace and the stability in the world. So these challenges and differences always must be taken into account when you are making a foreign policy, especially the pacts and some other things. So regarding this nuclear issue, and when you escalate the arm race, so there will be a nuclear power finally. Otherwise, you cannot challenge, because this is the final point. So therefore, they should know that you are very much detrimental to other challenges. So this is the kind of, if arm race started, then you never know when it's going to be stopped. So I think both China and the United States, I believe that they would refrain from escalating the arm race in Asia. Otherwise, there will be a conflict. Even the war or some major wars would happen. Maybe they can go like regional ones, small ones, they can go some other places, but Asia is very much concentrated. When they are fighting in Europe, like Soviet Union versus United States, they can carry the war in Latin America, they can carry the war in Africa, in the regional wars always happening during the Cold War. But right now, it is very much concentrated on Asia, China, and the US power. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador AKÇAM. And it's certainly fascinating that you share your own personal and professional experience as an ambassador to ASEAN. Now, I'd like to go back to Dr. Weinstein. I understand from your bio that you were nominated to be an ambassador to Japan. Perhaps you have some thoughts on what has been the reaction in Tokyo and what is the ongoing reaction of other allies of the West, Dr. Weinstein.
Look, I think the Japanese have welcomed the AUKUS decision, but they've done it in a manner where they've also doubled down on their cooperation with the French. And so they held a high-level meeting with the French defense minister and foreign minister right after the announcement. France and Japan, as important middle powers, as it were, have a long history of cooperation. I think they're going to, they're doubling down on that. The Indians were less welcoming of the AUKUS decision. They weren't opposed to it, but they didn't criticize it. But and the French are also increasing significantly their defense cooperation with India, which has a long-standing history of defense procurement from France in particular. So I think it's certainly what's interesting to me is the impact on the Five Eyes as well, which is the American, Australian, New Zealand, Canada, UK intelligence sharing alliance. This is an alliance of English-speaking nations that has a kind of division of labor in the intelligence world. And already the government of New Zealand has said that they're not going to accept nuclear submarines at their port in line with their longstanding policy. And the Canadians have expressed, in Canadian circles, there's been criticism of the AUKUS decision as creating a kind of two-speed Five Eyes, three countries that are very engaged on the security side with the latest technologies, and two others that are arguably less engaged. And so we'll have to look at the evolution of Canada's own Indo-Pacific strategy. Canada's tough on China policy, as it were, was on ice for a couple of years because of the two Canadians who were held in captivity in China, in essence, in exchange for Mrs. Meng, the Huawei executive, who was under house arrest, I believe, in Winnipeg for violation of U.S. law. So we'll see what direction China policy takes under the new Trudeau government. My sense is it's going to be moving in a harder line now. The Canadians too have woken up to the realities of what China is about. So, but it is. But it's certainly, the AUKUS alliance is absolutely welcomed in Tokyo, but they recognize the need to deepen cooperation with the French simultaneously.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstein. So, given the time, I think we have come to the to almost the end of the discussion. Maybe just to briefly, maybe Ambassador AKÇAM, you have a closing remarks of this discussion.
Thank you very much for Dr. Weinstein, and it's a very insightful, very concrete discussion, and I appreciate very much. And what I would like to say as a short remark, we shouldn't exaggerate the AUKUS because it is only a beginning, and we never compare the AUKUS with the NATO. It is totally different story. So therefore, as Dr. Weinstein just mentioned, and England also, after the Brexit, they want to be a global, they want to appear as a global power for domestic purposes also. And also it is a kind of Anglo alliance, which is English speaking, excluding Canada. And because the Australia and the United Kingdom and the United States, all they speak English. So that will be a kind of language, common language that they can go, especially for intelligence. It is a very much key. We know from the Bosnian War, especially in Europe, so there is always a miscommunication when there is a language. Language is a barrier for if you have a strong command structure. So I don't think there will be a NATO in Asia, and they cannot establish a kind of NATO form in Asia like NATO. It's impossible almost to make a kind of integrated military command with a lot of nations, and as a character of nations, as far as I know, the Asian nations, and I don't think they will be that much strong, establish a strong or support a kind of strong military alliance as in NATO, and Soviet Union is totally different from China when we look at its history, when we compare. So therefore, we have to look at all these details and the challenges and difficulties also, so that we can move on the right direction for the next step. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador AKÇAM. So you did mention that we shouldn't exaggerate this, and I think both speakers agree that this is a crisis, and no NATO will be in Asia. Dr. Weinstein, would you like to add something as your closing remarks of this discussion?
First, I want to thank you. It's been a fascinating discussion. I want to thank you. I want to thank Ambassador for his incredibly insightful remarks, and DİPAM for pulling this together. Yeah, no, I would agree this is not a crisis in NATO. We do need to pay closer attention in the United States to our European allies and to hear their thoughts and to engage them. We do not want the French to act as, which they can do if they want. They can cause all sorts of headaches inside of NATO, particularly on issues related to China, if that's the direction they want to go in, which would be very unfortunate. I think that the Biden team has taken some useful steps to start to listen to the French, which I think is quite helpful. I think we also have to be very clear with our German allies whose economy is so incredibly dependent on China about the direction of their economic dependence on China. And I'm hopeful that the new government in Berlin will at the end of the day have a tougher line on China than Chancellor Merkel's did. But this is definitely not, I agree with Ambassador AKÇAM, a new NATO alliance in Asia. It is definitely a special grouping, though, of these Anglo nations with very similar security concerns and absolute highest level technological capabilities and aspirations. And so it's an important new grouping, but neither AUKUS nor the Quad is going to turn into an alliance anytime soon. The Indians have been very clear. They get very upset when Americans start talking about the Quad as a sort of nascent NATO. They're clear that that is not the direction of Indian defense and security policy as of now. And so, and they believe in a more inclusive, free and open Indo-Pacific than we do. So on that note, I just want to thank you again. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm delighted I was able to take part in it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weinstein. And I think we have come to the end of our session. Once again, I would like to thank you to both our speakers for the fantastic thoughts that they shared on the subject, and definitely shed lights on what this pact means for the alliance. Also for our audience, for more of our publications, it can be found at www.dipam.org. Thank you so much, everyone, and please stay safe.